What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some thoughts on Assassin's Creed Shadows after playing the game via a preview event, which I'll explain momentarily, but seeing how people had been asking me whether or not I wanted to review this essentially since it was announced, I figured this would be a pretty good time to jump in and see whether it was worth it or not to me, because personally I have not played an Assassin's Creed game since the second title. So it is admittedly not a franchise I am terribly up to date on, but like I mentioned, people kept asking about it, so I figured at the very least I could bring you guys some gameplay, show you some systems, give you some first-hand information while also deciding whether or not it would be worth my time. Though speaking of time, we do have a little more, as this game was recently pushed back to March 20th, I believe, which is honestly probably for the best given how absolutely packed February was. But with that stuff out of the way, let's dive into what this preview was and my thoughts on it, naturally. So several months ago, originally before all of the delays, Ubisoft reached out, asked if I wanted to take part in a remote preview. Now, obviously that preview happened, but several months later, this past week in January. Now, the way these remote previews work is that they stream the game to your computer, meaning that I was not playing it natively on my own hardware, but I was playing it in my own house. And then following that, they send you the footage afterwards. This is so they can record it natively on their own machines where it's actually being played at, but realistically I can't comment much on its actual performance, though the game was being streamed to me at 1080, and truth be told, the recording looks better than what I was playing due to things like stream quality. So when you put all of that together, it means I can't really comment on its overall performance at the moment because obviously what they were streaming to me would have been a handcrafted demo for the press anyway, and it wasn't even on my own hardware, so I have no idea how it's running really. With that in mind, however, the build that I played was a work in progress. Mind you, anytime you see these press gameplay builds, they're usually a month or two behind where the actual build is now. So theoretically some stuff might change here, though realistically given the timing I would say it's most likely that things like exact numbers of specific skills, that type of thing would change, as opposed to complete overhauls. But nonetheless, in this build, I played through the prologue and the mid-game quest. They didn't want to show off the prologue, so basically the open world mid-game is most of the footage I have to show you. And the prologue itself was basically just the introduction of the dual protagonists, Yasuke and Naue. As intros go, they were pretty decent. I did like Naue's more, even though I preferred playing as Yasuke, but his introduction was a little lackluster. Now, story-wise, I'm a little out of date with my Assassin's Creed knowledge, as you might imagine, having last played 2, basically. But essentially, we're going to guide these two characters, playing as both of them as we see fit, tackling a sort of shadowy cabal that is trying to take over and control much of feudal-era Japan, specifically, I believe, the Sengoku period. So there's that. Now, the dual protagonist is pretty readily integrated into the way the story is. You can swap between them as you see fit. It even plays into exploration a little bit, which we'll talk about in just a second, but also you can play through different parts of missions with one or the other character. Each of them represents an archetype. Naue is more of your traditional assassin, whereas Yasuke is much more of a warrior and prefers the direct approach. And while you can do fighting with Naue or stealth with Yasuke, they are a little worse at it than the other. This largely means that if you're going for the typical assassin gameplay, Naue would typically be your best bet, but straight up combat feels better with Yasuke. In spite of that, there are some progression systems to be aware of, namely gear and knowledge and skill points. So I didn't mess around with this a ton, but it looks like you will be acquiring gear. Each bit of gear will have different sets available to you that will then augment your abilities, of course, and then as you participate in the open world, gain experience, interact with various things to do, you'll gain knowledge points, which you can then spend on one of the game's various skill points for each character, making them better at that specific thing. As an example, you could get a proper brutal assassination, as it calls it, for Yasuke, which allowed him to assassinate characters, albeit a little less quietly. And then, of course, there were a variety of weapons to wield, ninja tools to use as Naue, that kind of thing. For the most part, I would say this stuff felt pretty good. Now, actual combat uses your typical dodge, block, parry type stuff. Some attacks are unparryable or unblockable, so you have to get out of the way and reposition yourself if you missed the straight-up assassination, or if they are too tightly grouped to be able to do that, as an example. So it looked like there was some fun stuff to mess around with in terms of combat. But truth be told, the most interesting stuff to me, personally, that they were doing was actually to do with the open world. world. So this relates to both the main objectives, but also just general exploration. So the part of the game I played took place in the province of Harima, where we were tracking down a noble that is part of this cabal. And like I already mentioned, that led into the opportunity to play as either character through different parts. I believe there was one part of a mission that would have actually played out differently depending on who you chose to play as. And then within those main quests, there was even a little bit of like choice and consequence, but truth be told, this wasn't long enough to see if that was anything impactful or if it was just, the illusion of a choice. But I think it might have at least offered a little something, and that's because of a sort of side system. You see, as you're moving through all of the different provinces, you'll be setting up a sort of network called the League, which you can call upon to help you in various situations. This can see you calling in allies to like physically help you in combat, but also provide other resources. It's my understanding you'll be able to build a dojo even to house all these people. So it looks like there's a little bit of base building, but I didn't really get into that too much, so I don't know the specifics. But one aspect of this was actually how they handled quests and stuff. So it was pretty clear that they really didn't want you chasing quest markers, actually. And to this end, you had a couple of options. So typically speaking, quest givers would give you enough information to track down whatever it is you needed to find. And you could, actually do that, follow that information, find said person, etc. And this would involve things like getting to a general high point, scanning people in the vicinity, or simply following directions to a nearby house for the quest. Now, the alternative to that, to make things a little easier for people who don't necessarily want to follow through on that, is to use your league as scouts. So basically, on the map, you'll be able to acquire scouts and then have them scan a general area for you. And what this will do is reveal any potential quest locations in that area if you A, just can't find it at all, or simply don't want to at all. And I thought that was an interesting take on the age-old problem of trying to point people towards where to go without actually holding their hand at the same time. So I think it'll be curious to me to see people's reaction to that system in full, because it's honestly the most interesting part of this entire preview for me personally. Now, there were some other things that I wanted to mention, of course. So this open world section, there were cities and towns we could run around, several in fact, which gave me a decent feel for the game's dynamic weather system. And while this preview wasn't long enough to make note of it, there will apparently be a season system as well. So the actual seasons will change, which plays into things like the game's wanted systems. I have no idea if this is how it's been for a while, but back when I had played the game, if you were killing civilians, it would desync you from the animus or the plot device or whatever that surrounds the actual gameplay. Whereas here, you can do things like, stir up trouble and everything, but it will put a bounty on your head. You'll become wanted, and the game will start sending, depending on the severity of your bounty, guardians after you, which are like a general bounty hunting force that will track you down to try to kill you. Now, you can get around this by just swapping to the other character you are not currently playing as, which, won't be wanted as a result, which will make getting around a little easier. It's my understanding that bounties clear upon a season change, so I'm not sure if the seasons change as part of the story or if there's anything else going on there, because that seems like it might be a long time to wait for that kind of thing. So I'm curious what the time scale of a game like this would be, which I really don't have a solid answer for at the current moment. Now, otherwise, exploration looks to be a bunch of activities fueled by your own wanderlust. So, as an example, I found a bunch of shrines you could pray at for knowledge points. There was a quest I didn't get to do personally, but from what I understand would have introduced archery from horseback as an example. And then in other places, you could simply take in the environment, do sketches, things like that. And then theoretically, as you go around helping people with various side quests, you'll be able to build up your league to help you do more stuff like that scouting I mentioned. And for me, looking to review this, if I do wind up in fact doing that, my main thing would be how interesting that system is. Will, running around using scouts and stuff via this unmarked exploration actually lead you to interesting things, which makes exploring this period of Japan and the open world nature of it a compelling experience or not, which is something that I could see potentially being the case from this preview, but without playing the full thing, I just wouldn't know. Especially since, if I'm being honest, the plot didn't really speak to me. I mean, most of it I just thought was okay, but it wasn't really wowing me or anything. A lot of it just seemed to be chasing down various leads to get at certain members of this cabal, and it seemed fine, but I wasn't really blown away by it. And thus, as a result, the gameplay and the exploration and how they're kind of doing some interesting things there, or at least at first glance it would seem so, is what has my attention. So after playing it for a few hours, that's kind of where my own head is at about it. But that said, I'd love to know what you think about all this down in the comment section below. In particular, by all means, let me know if this is something you would actually want to see me review or not, because honestly, I could really see this one going either way. But that, of course, means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, but regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.